kind of move on to emphasize this idea of the relationship of the church and the Shoah, the Holocaust, there was a document printed, a document that came out in 1998 called, it was produced by a Catholic Commission for the Religious Relations with the Jews. And it was called We Remember, a reflection on the Shoah. And I think it's important for us to see now, this was 30 years after the council, the great reflection upon and understanding of how devastating the Shoah was and how sometimes complicit Christians were in augmenting the horrors of the Shoah. So,
yeah, but when let's say preachers were quoting the New Testament and the word Jews in the New Testament didn't have to necessarily mean the Jews that live today, but somehow they maybe, I don't know how much they made the effort of separating the Jews of the time of Jesus and contemporary Jews. And once the council made that disconnected those two aspects and said, we're not holding the Jews that live today as the killers of Christ, that made that is the opening. That is, I see as the opening.
Right. And it was not even the Jews of today, but it basically said the Jewish people were not responsible for the death of Jesus. All right, the Jewish people as a whole, and that was to extend. Yes, there were Jews and Romans involved, and these small groups who were involved in the actual passion and death of Jesus, but Jews as a whole were not to be blamed. Right?
I have a question actually in terms of, this is clearly like rewriting the contract or the relationship between Jews and Catholics. Was there anything before that in other councils that an attempt ever to formalize the relationship
on a positive level?
On a positive level,
no.
or not even on a positive level.
No,
but make it an official document.
No, I think that first of all, that's what made Vatican II unique. That this was the first time it spoke in a positive way about the relationship, about the Jewish people and its relationship to the church. Any statements, and there were statements as Pius IX, Pius X, made very denigrating statements about the Jews. But as far as councils were usually called to defend the church, to defend the doctrine of the church in some way, shape, or form, by condemning certain positions or redefining certain doctrines. Yeah. This council did not do that.
And I find it very interesting because from the Torah's perspective, the Jewish perspective, legally, to have a real contract, you have to have the negative side and the positive side. Otherwise, it's not a legal document. So, for example, when God tells the Jewish people, if you do that, I'll respond in this way. But if you don't, I'll respond in this way. Right? When you sign a lease with a landlord, the lease says, okay, you have to pay $1,000 a month to rent this place. But if you don't pay the $1,000, the consequences. And I think in that sense, it kind of mimicked a real contract. because it says the negative, right? It responded to the negative, and then it had a positive aspect too. It's not just that the Jews are not Christ killers, but they are also respected for holding to the tradition, to the relationship with God, to be the elder in the faith, that we are, in positive effect. So in that sense, I find it really, like the church signed a contract with kind of itself,
Right.
but projecting to the other faith.
Right. And I would just to just show you now, as I said, this was 30 years after the council, but in this document, I just want to go over a couple of interesting points that come up. And now remember, this focused on the Holocaust, the Shoah itself. The church has a special obligation to reflect on this horrible genocide by reason of her very close bonds of spiritual kinship with the Jewish people and of her remembrance of the injustices of the past. So there is this obligation to really reflect on the Holocaust and the effect it's had on the Jewish people because of this now living relationship between Catholics and Jews. The Shoah took place in Europe, countries of long-standing Christian civilization. So you have to realize that the Holocaust grew up in Christian Europe. And there were many Christians who either weren't strong enough, prophetic enough to speak out, and yet there were many Christians who followed Hitler and went along with what he said.
Yeah, actually, when you go to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem, the National Holocaust Museum in Israel, when you enter, there's a kind of you go through a track, and it's like room by room, and it kind of leads you into the progression, the historical progression. And actually, the first room deals with Nazism. I mean, it really is very interesting that when you enter, of course, Nazism, but the church, the root of Nazism in the church. That's the first room that you enter, is that connection. That all these centuries of negative rhetoric against the Jews manifested itself, ironically, even through a very secular government.
And the same is true if you've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. The interesting thing about that is that when you go in, you go to the top floor. So basically what you're doing as you're going through the museum, you're starting at the top floor and wending your way down in kind of a semicircular or a circular fashion to the bottom. And interestingly enough, one of the first exhibits you run into, again, is focused on the Nazis, their medical people, and what you see in the display are the different skulls with the different measurements to try to determine inferior and superior races because of the size of the skull and the brain and so on and so forth. And on the same floor, you're invited to go through and sit and watch a movie of the rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazism. So that's where the Holocaust Museum begins. It begins with the whole focus on Nazism and its attempt to create a master race. Okay? Not only is the idea of Vatican II itself interesting in trying to close the gap between Jews and Christians, but also John the 23rd himself, given that there were other John 22nd, 23rd, during the period where there were three popes. Jack sees a parallel between the closing of the gap between Christians and Jews, and John the 23rd closing the gap of this fissure that was created in the Avignon days of the church and so on.